everybody for coming. Well, I'm not excited to be on this side, I'm not gonna lie. I'm a little nervous, but Corey invited Ashley and I to be part of his talk tonight. So kind of like a panel. He'll discuss his work and process. I know you're all interested in that. And then I think he's gonna turn the tables and ask us questions. And then we'll open it for you guys too. But so I always tell my little story. But Corey, and I don't know if you read my newsletter, so just kind of zone out for a second. But I had a friend of mine at the Fine Arts Center years ago. We were just brainstorming ideas and artists, and she's like, "You have got to meet Corey." And I immediately looked online, and I was like, "Oh no, he's gonna say no." So I didn't ask. I didn't even ask for like years. This was probably like 3-4 years ago. And then I just didn't have the courage. And finally, he walked in with a really good friend of mine who they happened to teach at UCCS together. And I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna walk up to him. I don't even know if he knows who I am. And I was like, "Corey, I'm gonna go. Do you want to shout?" And he's like, "Oh my gosh, I would love to." And his response was amazing. And I was like, why was I so afraid? But as gallerists, we're afraid sometimes too. It's the moral of the story. And you just got to do it. So thank you for saying yes.
Oh my gosh!
It was a good lesson for me too.
Well, it's really a rare thing when a gallerist asks you to show with them, and at least that's been my experience. And so to me, that's just such a gift to have, like, to not even know that I was on your radar, you know. So yeah, I knew who you were because of Claire, our friend Claire, and from the space, I was just instantly excited to show here, especially because of so much of like what's happening down here between the two spaces, and over the last few years, the kind of cultural kind of revitalizing of this area. And of course, the more art spaces, especially the more really kind of thoughtful art spaces, the better our community, I think, our cultural community is. So thank you for being a huge part of that. So yeah, and and Ashley is y'all. I don't know if y'all know Ashley Anderson, who also volunteers here, works with Gundy, and was a student of mine, and is now a friend of mine, and an artist in her own right, a really fantastic artist who is shown here as well. And so when Gundy and I were talking about this, I thought initially, maybe Gundy and I can just have a conversation, because I really like kind of call and response quality of conversations rather than me just sitting up here and talking to you about where my art comes from. That's not how I make art. It's not how I teach it. So I felt like a really much more organic way to do this would be conversationally. But we thought, Ashley would be a perfect person to add to this conversation because of her bridge between the two of us. And so we have an old artist, me. We have a young artist, Ashley, and Gundy in the middle, who makes it all happen. So I'm really happy to be up here with you two. And although I have been accused of kind of like hiding behind these two, because I don't want to really give artist talks, that is not entirely untrue. But I tend to like to be in the background, but these two make it a lot easier to be up here, and I'm excited about the conversation. So thank you. Yeah, and thank you all for coming today. I mean, there's so many different things you could be doing with your Thursday evening. So it really is an honor to have you here. Looking at my work and being interested in hearing about it. So thank you for being here. So, what should we talk about? I'll start and just say a few things about the show, and then maybe we can open it up to Q&A. I certainly have questions for these two, but I really want this to be a relaxed and open conversation. So any kind of question, please feel free to ask it. I'm as honest as you can be, I think, about these things. I'm not super romantic about the art making process, as much as I love it. So let's just talk, okay? So I guess first, what I would say is that this work, I realized in the artist statement, my math skills aren't that great, and it said in the artist statement, because I wrote it, that I've been doing this for 15 years, but I added, or I guess I've subtracted, I missed that. It's actually 20 years. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's been even 5 years longer than I thought making this work. So I started in graduate school, and it came out of a place of desperation for me. So in school, it's pretty intense graduate school, and I was really at a loss as to what I was going to make for my thesis show about a semester and a half out. And, like really kind of crisis mode. And sometimes I do think that desperation makes for really great art. And not to say that my art is great, but it's great. It really helped me. Hi, Claire. It really helped. Well, let me back up. Okay, so I was in this place of desperation. I was looking at Agnes Martin paintings. I was looking at a lot of Indian miniature paintings and making sculptures out of poplar. And I just realized, like this, I don't really care about the sculptures I was making. I was like way more into the wood. And I thought, I'm absolutely in love with Agnes Martin and Indian miniatures. And so I thought I'm gonna and Josef Albers. That was another artist. I was probably those three forms of art I was looking at a lot. And so I just decided to make my version of an Agnes Martin painting, because when she was alive and she'd make these little studies that were about 9 by 9 inches that then she would oftentimes develop into larger pieces. And so I started doing it, and I just fell in love. I just felt like there was something that kind of went off like a gong inside of myself, like resonated with me. And in a semester or so, I probably made 40 paintings, which is insane. Like nowadays, it's like when I'm working a lot, I can make maybe a painting a week. But at that point, I was just on fire, and I made a ton of paintings. And in fact, I was really happy with most of them. And that became my thesis show. And at the time, I decided, somewhat like Agnes Martin, that I was going to make a lifetime commitment to this body of work. I was really interested in the idea that a limited set of circumstances, like if you choose a limited set of circumstances, what might come out of the creative problem solving that is necessary to deal with that over time. Like 1 year's one thing, 2 years another thing, but when you start getting 15, 20 years, the questions start to change a little bit, right? So how do you make work that's fresh? Can you revisit themes without them becoming formulaic? How do you still maintain the kind of vitality that's necessary to make work that has an impact on other people and that feels true to yourself? So that's what I've been doing the last 20 years, in addition to some side projects, but this stuff is really what I've been working on. And most of this stuff was made in the last year and a half, except maybe the little drawings in the back that I'd never shown here before. I made them in 2013 for a show in Portland, but nobody'd seen them in this area, so they'd only been seen by a few people in Portland. So when Gundy and I were talking about the show, initially I had another idea for the back space, but I kept coming back thinking about these little drawings, and I'm glad that you were willing to show them, because they're pretty reductive, and sometimes that really reductive work can be challenging to people. So I'm glad they're there, because I think they inform the stuff that's up here. So, that's kind of the story behind the work. In addition to artists, I'm inspired by things like just art history in general, but my daily life, I spend a lot of time outside in the natural world, and so that inspires me. Religious traditions like Buddhism and contemplative Christianity are kind of inform this work too. I have a degree in comparative religious studies as well as one in art, studio art. So I guess to me, when you're making art and you do it over time, one of the most amazing things that starts to happen is that the different disparate parts of yourself start to come together when you kind of allow them to, and you kind of start to become whole. Like the parts that don't seem compatible start to become compatible in some maybe mysterious way, and the work that you make becomes a reflection of all of those parts together. So, as an example, not only in addition to that kind of stuff that inspires me, what I realized somewhat recently is that my mom and dad didn't go to college, but my dad has an engineer's mind. He's German, and he has an engineer's mind, so he's very particular. And I grew up watching him drawing designs on wood, like little lines on wood, for things he was going to make, he was going to construct, right, for around the house or for his shop. And then my mom was an interior decorator, so color was a really big part of her practice, and how she used objects to kind of highlight and offset spaces. So I kind of realized maybe I'm just a combination of my mom and my dad in this work, right? That there's this like German particularness in addition to a love of color. So and an interest in how color plays off space. So I guess that's maybe an example of how all of these parts of yourself start to come together. You discover how they become a confluence in your work. I think it happens over time, though. I think it's something that just comes. I mean, it's a progressive thing, right? So I know there's a lot of my former students, colleagues here tonight, and I know they can all speak. You can speak to this, how that starts to happen even at an early stage in your career. But I think it happens more and more if you make art that really comes from your life. So I guess with that, we can maybe open it up, unless anybody has any questions specific to that, but we don't have to go in any direction. We can be very organic about this too. I have questions for these two, unless you do. Put you on the spot. I'll start. Oh, no, okay, good, okay, great, no, yeah. Well, I think there is, and that may be that probably, I wasn't a part of the install, but I make them, Gundy keeps that to herself. She doesn't let artists be a part of the install, which is probably good because she saved herself having to deal with me for a day with that, in my particularness. Although I totally, in those situations, I think I'm pretty and I totally trusted you. But I'm aware of how they're designed to be. They're designed for spaces like this, and so I guess the float that you're seeing, so the panels are quarter-inch. They're on quarter-inch board, and then they're hung on French cleats, which allow for a quarter-inch float. So the entirety of the depth of the painting then becomes an inch, and yeah, that's on purpose. So I want that kind of solidity and that a little bit of ephemerality that the French cleat offers, that they kind of hover there. So I think what happens when you have the right kind of light on them, the color starts to change and do some really interesting things, for sure. And I'm super picky in my studio about light. Like I work in a basement because of light changes in my other studio spaces. So I close the blinds to my basement windows. I have clamp lights with natural daylight surrounding my studio workspace, and yeah, and I work. That's one of the most frustrating things. I mean, it's really satisfying too, but trying to fine tune color to the point, when it really feels like the right thing. It starts with maybe a hunch, and then you move more and more towards a feeling. So, yeah, does that answer your question? A little bit? Yeah, somebody recently talked to me, and I can't remember who it was, about the edges. Who was that? Does anybody? So, the edges where the paint is, I actually paint like a 1/16 of an inch around the face of the painting, so that when you look at them, the profile or the edge, the raw edge, doesn't intrude upon the face. But you might not notice it just looking at it because it's so thin, but I hand paint that. So that's the kind of particularness that we're talking about, for better or worse, right? I mean, you make according to your sensibility. That's maybe that engineer in me. So, yeah, a lot of things go into that. I would say it's primarily driven by feeling. I think, and I do believe that feeling is content, meaning feeling is meaningful, right? And it seems like odd, maybe we all know that we are interested in art, I think, primarily because of how it makes us feel. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but that's my feeling about that, my feeling about feelings. So to me, it's driven by that, but also what I call motivating narratives, like stories that are behind the piece that, to me, aren't necessarily important for you to have an experience, but that drive the formal decision. So it could be a reference to other pieces of art. There's oftentimes, like this was actually a reference to a Japanese scroll. And I mean, it's a variation of that color and a variation of that composition. Others can be that they're related to, having a somatic or bodily experience is important to me for a lot of these. So these two in the middle, I don't want to lock you into that, but if you come across feeling or aware of your body a little bit more, that's maybe that kind of starts to determine that choice. So the ones on the wall over there, sometimes the titles refer to some of those decision making. So thinking about gratitude and praising not necessarily God. You could call that whatever you're praising that name, but just this kind of sense of gratitude. And how does that feel? I've avoided yellow for years, and then I decided, it has to be yellow for this series that's about praise for me. So yeah, associative. It comes from the stories that maybe I'm telling myself as I'm making them. I thought about that too, Gundy. Like I finished it. So I submitted the work to Gundy like a week before the opening, and I was like, Gundy, can I have a few extra days, because I'm still working on a couple that I want to try to include in the show, which is something I'm like, student, why do you wait until the last minute to do these things? Like I complained about my students. I didn't wait till the last minute, but I didn't finish as much as I quite wanted to finish. And that one was a piece I wasn't sure about to like include. Like I liked it, but I was like, I don't know how that's going to work. But I'm like, that's not my problem. That's Gundy's problem. So yeah.
I love it. I mean, I tried really hard to incorporate it with these five right here, but it just doesn't flow. Mm-hmm. But it has enough of the pink that I wanted it to. Mm-hmm. And then the other three in the back here in the sound space is just supposed to be the lines. The three, the two blue ones and the green one, and that color scheme not fit at all. But they look beautiful.
You do, yeah. Yeah, and I wouldn't. If she had cut it out, I would have been okay with it. Like I would always rather. I mean, I'm fine with also. I love the way that it looks, but she could have cut half of this stuff out. I would have been okay. I'm really reductive, and I mean, I think it looks beautiful, and I couldn't have done any better job than this. But for me, I'm always, if there was one painting on each wall, that would have been totally fine. Annalise is one of my students, so that's a great question. Well, I think, like so many things I feel like I've learned, like that thing about my mom and dad, that was to me really a profound lesson, that, made me feel closer to them. Also, I think the permission it gives you, like suddenly when you're working with a limited set of tools, you have to kind of, there's what's the word? You have to kind of be inventive. So you kind of have to open up possibilities for yourself, because you've already created limitations for yourself, right? So for me, it's like I don't want to add a lot of extra stuff. So like I don't want to add acrylic paint. I don't want to, So my basic set of tools would be, like gouache, watercolor, ink, charcoal, sometimes graphite, and then somewhat recently I did add primer. That was a big step to actually paint with gesso, right? So, because I like that it's a kind of foundational, I'm really thinking about these materials as foundational design and construction materials. Like gouache has been used historically for centuries, both as studies, but also within Indian miniatures, called opaque watercolor, right? And gesso is also foundational, wood is foundational. So I guess sometimes okay, I'm gonna crack that door open a little bit and see what's possible. And then suddenly having these realizations like, oh my God, like what you can do with gesso, just simply gesso. Like another body of work I may make, I'm thinking about making will be similar to this, but only gesso. And a kind of Robert Ryman, if anybody knows Robert Ryman's work. But the range of you start to really become intimately familiar with your materials. And so I always talk about how making art is somewhat like dating. And so you can be really promiscuous and you can date around and really have a lot of fun. But in that promiscuity, you lose some of the intimacy or the intimacy and depth of your relationships. So when you commit to something almost like monastically, like monks and nuns do, you become, and you wed yourself to that thing. The intimacy, instead of horizontality, you go vertical, right? There's such, you understand your materials, what they're capable of. So you gain a degree of mastery with that, I guess. I mean, it's a weird word, but I think that's not inaccurate. So those things, but I think maybe in terms of materiality, there's a lot of learning that goes on. In terms of the maybe larger picture, that permission also has given me that That limitation that kind of leads oddly to permission has also allowed me to explore my sense of, I don't like this word very much, but there's not a better word, the sense of spirituality. And so interconnectedness, I call it New Age, but New Age has a negative kind of connotation. But what I mean by when I say like these belong in a kind of New Age spiritual tradition, I mean that they're borrowing from a lot of precedents, that they're not committing to one religious tradition, like specifically or dogmatically. That I'm allowing myself to be influenced by a lot of things that help me have a deeper sense of my own impermanence, the beautiful, fragile qualities of the most important experiences we have, the rhythms that underlie our lives. So yeah, so I think it's kind of like maybe like a tea ceremony, like talking about some of your interests, right? And and how these limitations in doing them long enough, that flow state that comes up, but also, the more you chew on these things repeatedly, you kind of get surprised by the insight that comes out from that. And you know that better than anybody. I mean, your work is very repetitive, and not a negative way. That it takes a lot of work to make the things you make. And so, what happens when you commit to that labor, right? Yeah, it's frustrating and wears you out. But then there are these moments of insight when you're chewing on it that are really incredible. I don't want to speak for you, but I think that's true, you know, and you too. Yeah, I mean, you both are so similar. I was shocked. Like when Ashley showed up in my classroom, um, she showed me her sketchbook, and I was like, "Who the hell is this person? Like, this is not a person that belongs in the 21st century. You know, like 19th century. This art is so incredible and so like thoughtful and considered, and such became. I mean, you were always a hard worker, but then I realized what a hard worker in a class that we had together. And then Annalise comes a few years later. I'm like looking at her sketchbook, like, are these two sisters? Because they belong from another, they're like from another era. And I say that in a very positive way, like such thoughtfulness with your materials, such thoughtfulness with your sketches and your ideas. So yeah, I mean, I think you both know that very well, how that works. I mean, probably everybody does when you commit to, when you get in that flow state, right? You repeat certain activities and how they kind of juice out a little bit, you know? So do you mean like, how does the material influence the meaning with each piece, or what do you, can you? Oh, I gotcha. Yeah, I mean, it really is an individual, like it happens on an individual basis, but maybe I can answer it by just telling a story, because I think those are better ways to answer questions when it comes to art. So, you know, so when I buy wood, you know, I go and I go many places to look for, it's all poplar in this room. The wood, the little drawings are made on aspen boards, but this is all poplar because it's readily available, it's abundant, but also icon paintings, traditionally, many of them were painted on poplar. And so that's not the only wood that was used, but it was a common wood. So, and I also like poplar because it's how pale it is and how strange the grain pattern can be sometimes. It's also extremely soft, and so I can work a surface. You know, at some point you overwork it and you have to get it in panel, but you can sand and rear it fairly easily. But the grain pattern and the paleness is the fragility of it is maybe the thing that I'm most attracted to. And so I start by looking at a number of boards. Like if I'm at Lowe's or something, I try to go C&O lumber, but sometimes they are too expensive and they have more than, I can't find what I need. But I'll take every board out of their bin, and I'll be in the aisle with like, you know, piles of boards and looking for grain patterns, and also looking to see how true the wood is. Because y'all probably know, you know, wood breathes. Even these that are sealed, they're still going to breathe, and some of them have a little bit of a curve to them. But I try to find boards that are straight, and then after that, boards that have interesting grain patterns that maybe in some way speak to things I'm thinking about at the time. And so then I get in the studio and I start making line drawings on top of the boards, kind of like my dad did when he was making stuff for the house, for our family. But for me, not with no practical function, right? Just aesthetically. And then So, you know, I'm really interested in in a lot of different, I guess you could say binaries or oppositions. So things like hard and soft, things like organic, synthetic, intimate and familiar. Uh, so I'm really after qualities, micro, macro, things that both look like they obviously they're very small, but some of them I feel like contain greater depth of space. And also, many of them I want some balance between, well, really like movement and stasis, balance and imbalance. So a lot of those themes, depending on the piece, determine how I compose them. And I make thumbnail studies for every one of them. So, you know, tiny little drawings in my sketchbook that don't always hold to the actual piece, but are a way of visualizing, getting out the things that are in my head, you know, because there's such a difference between your mind's eye and the actual thing you're making. So yeah, does that answer your question a little bit? Okay. And then, you know, you play with transparency and opacity. And that has to happen with your paint, because the paint, Gunny and I were kind of texting and recently, and you know, each one of them, there's a little bit of magic that has to. And I think that's true almost all art. Like for it to finish, it's not entirely in your control. And so, you know, there's a little bit of magic that happens. Like, and there's a lot of unknown that happens. So for instance, the one that we were talking about, the red one back there that Jonah talked about in the far corner, the pinkish cherry-looking one, that's a piece of wood I've been working for probably 7 years. Like I've tried different compositions on that piece of wood for probably 7 years, and could not get it to work for the life of me until I just said, you know, I just had to start totally from scratch with that one and respond to different elements of the grain than I was responding to initially. And then it worked, you know, then it worked. It doesn't seem like you're like, what? That's really simple. Why couldn't you get it? I couldn't get it, you know, because you're really never really exactly sure what you're after. You work somewhere between knowing what you want and then kind of being open to discovery. It's a real combination of that, right? So yeah, you know, where can you emphasize space? What's unique to each piece of wood that you might want to highlight? But you know, you also, like, if it's something that you're too in love with, you want to maybe be a little bit weary of that. You know, I talk to students, whether you like Picasso or not, he had some really great advice for students. And he would say if there was ever a thing in his painting that he loved, he'd get rid of it. And I use that, I follow with that advice, and it's served me well. So you can't love it too much, you know? Yeah. Yeah.
I'm wondering about why this kind of work today. And
Yeah.
I'm thinking about art historically.
Yeah.
You know, the emergence of, say, minimalism in response to stuff.
Yeah.
But yet, all the three of you, and myself included, and a lot of us here, find something to respond to something. Minimal, poetic, meditative quality.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, do you think it's something, and I'm curious to hear from all of you,
Yeah.
actually your practice is very meditative.
Yeah.
Wow. Is it something idiosyncratic to some of our souls that we respond to this? Or is it something today?
Yeah.
Something now that is kind of pushing the need for this kind of work today?
Yeah, I love that.
There might be something, you know, that it's not either or, it's both bad. But I'm just curious to hear, because Benny, you had said, this is the kind of work that you really like to show in gallery.
Yeah.
So, why this work today?
That's a really great question. And Gundy, do you want to start? And I want to hear Ashley's thoughts about it too, because you do make work exactly. I mean, we're in a family, right? Yeah.
I mean, I'm drawn to this because it quiets the mind and it's meditative. I think on First Friday, I was like, oh my gosh, there's too many people for this show, which is never something you would say. Like, it's business. I want as many people in here as possible. But it's such a quiet, peaceful, meditative, I think Jasmine said poetic, all my really poetry, but it is poetry. And in this world, or in my life, I just like go, go, go. I have 3 businesses. I have a kid. I have a husband. It's just like I never feel like I can quiet the mind. And this, like, I love coming into this space.
I don't know. I mean, I think it's both and, right? I think that as on a personal level, I'm incredibly drawn to anything contemplative. For philosophical reason, I do think that art is reality versus broadening your horizons. I think that there's an aspect to broadening your horizons, but I think if you can find a way to go deeper and deeper into what the world actually is, then no matter what really is going around you, you kind of are anchored, and there's this stillness that occurs. So I think that as an artist, if you are able to find an access point or a way to achieve that, then in a way you are bringing other people into that conversation or that reality of being still, which I think everyone's striving for. And that kind of ties back into the book where I think today, why this book today. Everything's crazy. Everything's intense. You're always on your phone. If you're not on social media, then you're texting, or you're calling, or you're emailing, or people are like, hey, I haven't heard from you in a while. And it could have been like 2 days. And so it is a bizarre reality to have access to everyone at all times. And if they aren't responding, then you are flipping that and internalizing it to like, well, what's wrong with me? And so there's just become this, I think mentally a branch of, you can kind of get into a vicious cycle where that is going and it all becomes about you in some way. And so I think when you bring minimal work into the gallery or you bring minimal work out to the world and you get people to encounter it, then you're kind of showing them a world where it isn't all about them because it's that access point between the individual and then universal truths, or that undercurrent that's always existed within the world, which is why I use gold, and why I'm consistently returning to it. And if it isn't the material itself, it's the idea of gold or light. And because it gives you something to base your subjective or your individual experience on. And so it just reconnects us to who we are as an individual and feel centered and feel okay and quiet. And learn too. When you minimal, you have to be still. If you're going to get anything out of it, you have to be. And it's one of those beautiful things that if you live with it, it keeps teaching you. And so it also acts as a lesson in life, which I think good art can do. I think some art does better, but I think within the nature of minimal art, that because you have to do it, that it changes throughout time, and you change throughout time. So then your relationship to the art also changes. You pick up new nuances. Same thing as an artist. So then you're also drawn. Your relationship to the artist becomes similar too, and that you kind of become one. And the relationship with the artist is always changing with the art because it's contemplative and slow. And then if you buy that piece and you live with that piece, then your relationship with that art becomes contemplative and slow. And it's a completely different work in relationship to you in 20 years. And so I think that that's something that we're longing for. And I think, at least for me and my work, I mean, if you're talking about anything in the poetic sensibility to it, I think that longing is the center point of that. And I think that's an incredibly beautiful, powerful thing. And I think minimalism, by the nature of it, is pulling on that longing a little bit more. Whether you're longing for more or you're longing for less, or you're longing to understand it more, and you just don't you might not know enough about it, but you feel it and you understand it. That's what poetry is. Where you don't really know what it's saying, but you understand what it's saying. And I think when art is doing its job well, that's what it's doing. And again, I feel like that's the intrinsic nature of minimal art. And so that's why I'm personally drawn to it. But I also like it's so apt to where it's standing in its place today. And maybe why we're drawn to it right now. And that comes and goes with, trends, I think, artistically. But I think it also is why it works so well in this space. And, I mean, the nature of the landscape, too, with the West, it's so centered on landscape and light. And so abstract art, which would have been Agnes Martin and Keith, and all of your people, actually, are more out West. So.
Yeah, many of them, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure I have much to add to that. I think that's like the pertinence of work like that. Because on one hand, it's going to sound strange, but I know that some work like this feels retrograde. In the sense that it's like it's reductive abstraction that maybe could even be from like early 20th century American abstract traditions, or it could be even Bauhausian or something. One of the things that I think that minimalism as a movement and the work, I mean, as a loose movement of artists. Like so many of those materials are industrial. Even the wood that's used is industrial, like plywood. And I think on a really deep level, we sense that industrial productive, like that industrial quality, even when it's more humanly composed. But for me, I don't, these are milled boards from trees that they're not laminated, they're single pieces. And it, I think that creates a bit more empathy with work like this. Like it just, that we have a softer feeling towards work that is made like that, And for me, gentle, soft, Jasmine said something when she walked in and about like poetic, gentle, soft, or I think you're sweet or something. And those are things that I want people to experience with this. I mean, some get a little darker to me emotionally, but mostly I'm interested in gentle, making work that's gentle, soft, mysterious, because of the reasons these two just outlined, for sure. And I think that's really relevant for the reasons they outlined. And maybe for you too. I mean, we are in this crazy fast, frenetic society, and I think probably we all long to slow down a little bit, long to have real connection. Yeah, that's the goal, for sure. Yeah, thanks. Great question. Yeah. Any others? And these two? And I'd like to ask you two about, so maybe starting with you, Gundy, when you're thinking about showing people, what are you kind of looking for? And I mean, you show a wide range of work. So are there things out there with artists themselves or the work that you're kind of like, you try to key in on?
I mean, I'm always looking for certain caliber.
Mm-hmm.
I obviously want to showcase good art, and neck and neck. I just want to work with good people.
Mm-hmm.
To be honest.
You don't want difficult people?
I don't want. I have worked with difficult people. You're out for it. That's like the last time I'm working with you.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna get that pink slip after this comes down next week.
But I'm able to say that with the luxury of over 10 years of business that I can choose who and I know that's incredible luxury. And I don't take it for granted, but I like working with nice people, and I want to go. So that's business.
Yeah. So what about you when you're looking at art? I know you're not a curator, but you look at art, and art influences your practice. Yeah. So yeah, maybe not like it's not professional curator yet, but you're definitely a professional artist. So
What do I look for?
yeah, like when you look, like what kind of work do you look for? Like what draws you? Is there certain qualities to pieces that draw you, that influence you in your own practice?
That's a good question because it ranges quite a bit. I do feel like I'm always drawn to some taste of melancholy to artwork. I feel like melancholy usually is operating between hope and sorrow. And so I feel like they're talking about something quite, whether it's historically speaking, politically speaking. I am drawn, generally speaking, to less political arts, or like poetically political arts, where people are drawn to the human nature of a situation. So where you can empathize and realize that we are all human, and that's what we're drawn to. So usually something more simple or abstract, but even if it's figurative and it's much more realistic, especially coming from a more realistic tradition, if there feels like a tinge of sadness in it, and it's like the longing for something better, or it's something that's beautiful and it's the sadness of something that's sad, terrible has happened.
You're one of those artists.
No,
No, it's true. I mean, it's a. Oh yeah. I have a good friend who's a very.
It feels like poetry. It feels like anything that feels like visual poetry, or it feels nuanced.
Yeah.
It can be anything, installation, painting.
Yeah.
But something that's not afraid to go where is sad, but is doing it formally in a very beautiful way.
Yeah.
Which I think by the form of it is bringing hope. And so I love that.
Makes sense. Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard not to feel some melancholy about the world, right? I mean, when you kind of start to think about our existence. No, it's the happiness of being sad, right? Yeah. Isn't that that's like Victor Hugo's definition of it, right? Yeah. But I think that idea that you go through life without feeling that, right? Like that seems to me like really a truth of our existence.
Yeah.
Like it's beautiful, but it also is heartbreaking.
I feel like it puts you in a place to where you can cultivate empathy.
Mhm.
And I love that, where you can feel secure and hopeful
Mhm.
in yourself, but also be able to relate to other people's sadness. And the beauty of that, of hearing other people's sorrow and their happiness,
Yeah.
is like that little access point that I feel like operates really well in whichever direction, in whatever form it's taking.
Makes sense. To me, makes sense.
How about
Yeah.
you?
What's that?
How about you? Or you
Oh, I already talked about it.
Oh.
Well, I don't know if I can maybe pinpoint outside of O'Keeffe for sure. That's one of the things that, this is going to sound weird, but when I was interviewing for this job at UCCS, I teach painting up at UCCS, teach art, and I told myself I was going to be as honest as I can about my influences, right? And in academia, in art academia, you don't know, it's not necessarily safe to say George O'Keeffe influences you, because George O'Keeffe is super popular, right? And it doesn't show that you know anything like deeper about the contemporary art world when you mention one of the most popular modernist painters in the history of the world, right? Especially American painting. But I said, to hell with it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to show images of rainbows, not ironically. I'm going to do it. I'm going to be honest about it. I'm going to be myself. And I also, even at the time, this was in 2007, I didn't have this on a computer. Like, I brought a slide carousel. So I did my artist talk with a ka-chink, ka-chink, ka-chink. And because I'm a Luddite, I don't get how computers work even now. And I wish I could still use slides, but they're totally not practical. But I think it made the talk memorable, because they thought, that's the guy with the slide carousel. That guy was kind of interesting. I don't know what I was talking about. I lost my train of thought. But, the Western landscape, for sure. I mean, I grew up in Fort Collins. I was born there. And I've always been drawn more towards the plains than the mountains. Although I love the mountains too, but I'm like, going east has always been interesting to me, maybe more so. And maybe because my family were farmers out in Berthoud, Greeley, Johnstown area. I didn't grow up on a farm. They had since sold it, but I think that stuff is generational, probably carried in your genes in some way, like generations of farmers. And so when I go to New Mexico, to probably the frustration of my girlfriend, who likes to be in the mountains, I like to go out into the desert and hike. If it's really hot, you may try to go really early, but I like that open space, because I think, well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know why that is. I'm just really attracted to that kind of space. I feel free in that kind of space. And so when I'm hiking, I'm kind of looking for that. Or when I'm hiking, I'm looking in the mountains, I'm looking for moments when the woods open up, when you can discover little things, like recently discovered some native orchids that are in Colorado. And I didn't know my whole life that we had orchids growing here. But little moments when like like a shrub opens up and you see these things growing, such a beautiful thing. Like, so for me, revealing and concealing, like the opening of a space or the closing of a space, kind of reflect that, both that literal moment, but also those moments of insight that you have. So I'm not sure if that quite addresses, the erotics of place, sensuality. To me, these things are also masculine and feminine, and they're also at times, maybe not this work, but I've been interested in kind of sexuality with some of this work, and how, not in terms of gender specifics, but how genders can start to merge, and like receptivity and penetration and things like that, not necessarily connected to like a physical gender, but a kind of gendering of energies, or a gendering of activities. So yeah, I don't know how that relates to a landscape, but it certainly relates to O'Keeffe and O'Keeffe's interpretation of landscapes. So maybe sharing that sense of eroticism, that sense of like how attention is love, and when we're really attentive in our movements through the world with each other or through space, it's an act of love. So my hope with these is that they exhibit a kind of love for each one of them, like this, maybe to the point of too much control. I don't know, but there's a lot of lack of control in them, in the process, that no one sees. Gundy's scene, where the sausage gets made, and my studio's a mess, right? I mean, it's organized for me, but it's piled full of junk, but this is what comes out of it, with yeah. Maybe not compared to other people.
It's like a stray paper over there.
Yeah, for me, it's messy. Like I want my studio to reflect this, but it just doesn't. Does that answer your question? Kind of. You know, it could be. You know, and this is all since I've been going down. I mean, I've been going down there since 1990, about, and I've always wanted to live there. And had I not been hired here, I might have just gone to Albuquerque and worked at a Whole Foods or something, right, and made art. But luckily I got a job here, close to my family, and so yeah, I think you know, in the light here versus even Fort Collins, the light changes as you move up and down the Front Range, and Taos versus Santa Fe, or Albuquerque versus Santa Fe, all of that, and seasonally obviously too. But you know, I started making this work in North Carolina as a way of, I think, dealing with some homesickness too. That was part of it. I mean, the desperation, but also I was really missed the wide open space out here. And so I think making this work, it was almost like getting me close, you know, not that all of them have deep space, because some of them certainly compress that space and close it off. But I think most of them have an entry or exit place, or space, or a moment of entry exit, you know, into space, deep space. So at least that's how I feel. So that's probably where that comes from. You know, I have to say, I haven't thought, that's a great question, but I'll have to think about that more as this work continues to develop and I spend more and more time down there. Because certainly I think it will. That desert landscape is so different even from here. So yeah. Yeah, and this little one, like there's always like little stories behind them all for me, but this one is actually an homage to Cormac McCarthy. You don't know who Cormac McCarthy, the writer, is? That's why it's called Plain. It's subtitled Plain, for a reference to his book Cities of the Plain. Yeah, and he died when I was making it, so that's why. That's yeah. So you know, that Border trilogy is all about that. One of the things that it's about is that space, right? That landscape. I guess it would be Texas, but Plains of Texas. Yeah, it doesn't. It generally doesn't have to be honest with you. Like, so most of the work that I get done, like when Gunny and I were talking about this show, we initially came up with a date, and I'm like, that means I'm gonna have to make a lot of work during school, and it's really hard for me to transition between artist mind and academic mind, right? So I asked her if we could move it off, and she was generous, and we moved it off. So, I mean, I still work during the school year, but I can't give myself to it the way that I would if I didn't have an academic job. Like in the summer, you know, I work every day. Maybe like if I go to New Mexico, I might have a weekend off or something. But I'm generally looking at art even when I'm going down there. And so I work every day, probably minimum 6 hours, maximum sometimes 12. You know, where I'm in my studio all day. And then on average, I can get one done a week if I'm working like that. If I'm working that intensely. So to me, I have to cloister off. I have to say no a lot to social activities. I really try to get all my schoolwork done quickly after the end of the semester so that I can start getting into artist mindset, you know? And so like during the school year, if I have a long weekend or you know, the things I can do that don't require such levels of attention, like sanding and cutting wood's pretty easy to do without, you know, doesn't take a lot out of you, you know, and doesn't take a lot of attention. I can start drawing, things like that. I can cut cleats, I can, you know, things like that. If I have an extremely long weekend, I might be able to work on a piece. Or I can work on some of the tertiary stuff that I do that, you know, I have other projects that I'm working on that aren't directly related to this, that maybe are more about social criticism or things like that, right? So I can do some of that stuff a little bit easier. So they are pretty distinct, but I do think, you know, when people ask me what I do, I say that I'm a professor first. Because it's not because that's what I think I am more. I think I'm an artist first and a professor second. But it's one of those things where it just makes it easier. Like people, there's a lot of weird hangups not maybe amongst y'all because you're here, but there's both positive and negative associations we have with being an artist. Like it's romantic, but it's also like, is this person kind of a dropout, you know? And so I just try to bypass that and say I'm a professor. But in my mind, like I'm 51%, if not more, artist and 49% professor. And so, and also Margie, I stepped down as the co-director of visual art, best decision ever. So yeah, so my administrative responsibilities have diminished like significantly, and I can kind of pick and choose where I start to engage. And so like for me, it's like student-centric stuff. Like I love working with students, and it's one of my great joys in life. And because for me, like I became an artist because of teachers, because of artists who were my teachers. Like they really supported me and showed me that I could do it. And so I want to challenge students, and I want to be that person for them, almost like paying it forward in a way, I guess. So that's not that big of a transition, like between classroom and studio. It's a little different because you're stepping out, but in some ways it's easier because you can talk about another person's work so much easier than you can talk about your own. So, but you learn so much too. I mean, students teach you so much about your own, the stuff you carry, your own prejudices, your own aesthetic preferences. So it's really, really fantastic way to make a living as an artist. Because you make a solid living as an academic, and then you don't have to worry about selling. It's yeah. I never make thinking I'm going to sell anything. Anytime someone buys a painting, I just think, how lucky am I that someone cares that much that they want to live with it. I want to sell things because I really like working with Gundy. And I think if I sell stuff, maybe we'll work again together. Like Gundy will have me back in a couple of years, and we can do this all again. And you want to support the community too. Like keeping this place open is a big deal. So buy local art, y'all. You can support your local artists. That's why these don't have my hand in them. Like they have my hand, but it's not an autobiographical mark. Like a Jackson Pollock mark, Franz Klein or something. Like those are like an autograph, and I want to disappear. Like I'm interested in being myself, but letting that ego dissipate, as much as I can. And students, boy, they push that. They can really challenge you to do that in a good way, because it's really about them. So you can really kind of let go and just try to help. Although sometimes you try to help and just try to be honest, and you just end up causing someone to cry. But the intention's good. So, yeah. Sure. Any other thoughts? Or are we about done?
We're at an hour.
Okay. So, question for you two. So, just real fast, just really fast. So, what advice would each of you give to young artists? So that put you on the spot, so because you're a person who helps artists become have a professional life. So what advice would you give them?
Okay. So artists, keep trying and don't get scared. Even though in the beginning of the whole talk, I was scared to ask you. That was a lesson for me. Even after all these years and at my age, I still get scared. I still have to keep trying. And I encourage young artists to just keep going to galleries, keep making art, just keep doing it. This is your passion, this is my passion, and this is my heart and soul, and doing art is yours, and it's gonna happen. It's gonna happen.
Yeah, so stick with it.
Stick with it.
Yeah, excellent advice. What about you?
Good question, since I don't feel like I'm in a position to answer that question.
Well, you have an undergrad in art.
Yeah.
You've shown, you've sold,
Yeah.
you've had residencies.
Mm-hmm.
You're a professional artist. Yeah, you are. I mean, I think of you as that,
Yeah, I would say probably just be comfortable with mystery. Practicing muscle of your intuition when you don't understand it. Is probably the biggest thing until you figure out, and to just keep doing enough things and you start picking out enough of a pattern. Because I would even in that sense, it kind of challenges your idea of you not having a heavy hand, that you have a sensibility, and your sensibility is your autograph.
Yeah,
because I can
it really
walk
is.
into even with the holiday show, I can walk into videos or chords without you having to autograph. So I think when you start making enough work, you have a sensibility and soul behind it, to where you start figuring out what you're making or why you're making it, and figuring out your visual language and the philosophy that sits behind that. But yeah, I would say. I mean, there's been enough times in our relationship where you're like, why are you making? I have no clue, but I have to make it, and I have to figure out why.
Yeah.
So so being comfortable with mystery.
Yeah, that's great life advice, I think.
Yeah.
At least for me, it's been good advice.
Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. Well, thank you for that.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thanks for having me. Yeah, thank you all for coming. I really appreciate your support. So thank you, everybody.